Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jonathan always considered himself a lucky man. Working as a software engineer at a solid company, having a beautiful and successful wife, living in a comfortable suburban home, everything seemed to fit together perfectly. Laura, his wife, was a marketing manager at a well-known advertising agency, and he admired her dedication to her job. They'd met years ago at a corporate event, and their wedding had been lavish, with Colin, Jonathan's younger brother, serving as one of the groomsmen. Colin had always been the pampered baby of the family, the one Jonathan had helped countless times over the years, whether by lending him money or giving him job referrals. Their brotherly bond seemed strong, even if Colin had a habit of showing up unannounced and settling in as if it were his own home. Over the past 3 months, however, something had changed. Laura began mentioning evening meetings more frequently. At first, Jonathan didn't think much of it. After all, the corporate world was demanding, and he understood the sacrifices her career required. But these meetings became increasingly regular, 2 or even 3 times a week. Laura would leave around 7 in the evening, saying she was meeting clients or discussing strategies with her team, and return close to midnight, always with the same excuse: the traffic was terrible, or the meeting ran longer than expected. Jonathan noticed she came home with her hair slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged, and always with a faintly restless look she tried to mask with a tired smile. One night, while washing the dinner dishes he'd made alone, Jonathan noticed Laura's perfume was different when she came home. It wasn't the soft, floral scent she usually wore in the morning, but something more woody, almost masculine, mixed with hers. He mentioned it casually, and Laura replied it must have been from a colleague who hugged her goodbye. Her explanation came too quickly, too rehearsed. Jonathan felt an uneasy sensation settle in his chest, an unease he couldn't quite name, but that grew stronger every time she grabbed her phone and left the room to take a call. Colin, on the other hand, had also seemed different lately. His visits to Jonathan's house became less frequent, and when he did show up, there was a strange tension in the air. He avoided looking directly at Laura, or maybe it was the other way around. Jonathan sometimes caught brief, furtive glances exchanged between the two, followed by uncomfortable silence. During a Sunday barbecue, Jonathan mentioned Laura's frequent evening meetings, and Colin abruptly changed the subject, making a forced, unfunny joke about his own job. That night, after everyone had left, Jonathan lay awake in bed listening to Laura's breathing beside him and realized he no longer recognized the rhythm of it. It was as if the woman lying next to him were a stranger. His suspicion turned into certainty when Jonathan casually checked their shared credit card statement. There were strange charges: restaurants in neighborhoods Laura had never mentioned having meetings in, a florist he didn't recognize, even a purchase at a lingerie store he knew wasn't meant for him, since nothing new had appeared at home. Jonathan wasn't impulsive, but this was too much. He needed to know the truth, and he needed concrete proof. So, after a quick online search, he decided to buy a discreet vehicle security camera. The device was small, about the size of a lighter, and could be easily hidden in Laura's car dashboard. Jonathan waited for a day when she left early for work, installed the camera pointing toward the interior, connected it to the car's electrical system, and adjusted the angle to capture both the driver's and passenger seats. The camera had night vision and automatically started recording when it detected movement. 2 days later, Laura announced she'd have another important meeting that night. Jonathan simply nodded, wished her good luck, and waited. She left at 7:15, and he stayed alone in the living room, trying to watch TV but unable to concentrate. Every 5 minutes, he checked the clock. At 11:30, he heard her car pull into the garage. Laura came in through the kitchen door, tossed her purse on the counter, and said she was exhausted. Jonathan replied with a curt "I imagine," and she went straight upstairs to the bedroom. He waited until he was sure she was in the shower, then quietly slipped out to the garage, opened her car door, and removed the camera's memory card. Back in his office, his hands trembling slightly, he inserted the card into his computer and opened the video files. The first recording showed Laura getting into the car alone, fixing her hair in the rearview mirror, and applying a bold red lipstick Jonathan had never seen her wear. She typed something into her phone, smiled at the screen, and then drove for about 15 minutes until she parked in a partially empty lot behind a shopping mall. Jonathan fast-forwarded the video. Then, at the 12-minute mark, the passenger door opened, and someone got in. Jonathan felt the air leave his lungs. It was Colin. His brother. Colin entered the car with a disturbing familiarity, reclining the seat as if he already knew his preferred angle, fiddling with the radio without asking, tossing a backpack onto the back seat like it was his space. Laura smiled, that smile Jonathan hadn't seen in months, and said something the camera captured perfectly, "I missed you, love." Jonathan paused the video. Love. She'd called him love. He took a deep breath, forced himself to keep watching. Colin leaned in and kissed Laura. It wasn't a quick or casual kiss. It was slow, intimate enough for Jonathan to understand this wasn't new. It had been going on for a while. It was comfortable for them. They chatted for a few minutes, and Jonathan turned up the volume. Colin mentioned they needed to be more careful because Jonathan had been asking more questions lately. Laura replied that she was handling the situation, that Jonathan didn't suspect anything serious, and that he was too predictable to figure it out. The word predictable echoed in Jonathan's mind like a gunshot. They stayed in the car for another 20 minutes, talking, laughing, sharing intimate details of their lives. Colin mentioned he'd almost slipped during Sunday's barbecue when Laura walked past him and he nearly touched her. Laura laughed and said he needed more self-control. Jonathan fast-forwarded. Together, they got out of the car, entered Colin's vehicle parked nearby, and the recording continued showing Laura's empty car for nearly 2 hours. When she returned, alone, she straightened her clothes, checked her appearance in the mirror, and drove back home. Jonathan checked the time stamp. She arrived home at 11:30. Everything was timed, rehearsed, planned so no one would suspect a thing. Jonathan watched enough recordings to confirm this was a recurring pattern, meetings that had become routine. Always Colin getting into her car as if it were his own, always that sickening intimacy that only grew with each new video. In one recording, Colin mentioned they needed to think about the future, that this couldn't go on forever. Laura replied she was waiting for the right moment to resolve things with Jonathan. Resolve. As if Jonathan were a problem to be solved, discarded, erased from the equation so the two of them could move on with their lives. Jonathan closed the laptop and sat alone in the dark office for nearly an hour. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He felt something worse than anger, a cold, cutting clarity. He'd been betrayed not only by the woman he'd married, but by the brother he'd raised, helped, and protected. Colin, the one who ate at his table, borrowed his tools, knew every corner of his life. Laura, the one who slept beside him every night, said she loved him, planned vacations with him while plotting his disposal. Jonathan realized they felt no remorse. They felt inconvenience. The betrayal wasn't the problem for them, Jonathan finding out was. The next morning, Jonathan acted with unsettling normalcy. He made coffee, wished Laura a good morning, and asked about her day. She replied with the same polite indifference as always. Jonathan waited until she left for work, then made 3 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney a coworker had recommended months earlier, when another engineer at the company went through a messy separation. The second was to a digital security technician, requesting certified copies of the recordings in multiple formats and on multiple devices, all with verified date and time stamps. The third call was to his mother, asking her to organize a family dinner for that weekend. She was surprised. He rarely took the initiative to arrange family gatherings, but agreed enthusiastically, thinking her son was finally making an effort to bring the family together. The dinner was set for Saturday night. Jonathan spent the next few days preparing meticulously. He copied the recordings to a USB drive, edited the most revealing clips into a 5-minute video, and tested his parents' TV connection to ensure it would work flawlessly. At work, he maintained his mask of normalcy, replying to emails, attending meetings, as if his life weren't crumbling inside. At home, he treated Laura with the same distant courtesy, and she noticed nothing unusual. Why would she? To her, Jonathan was predictable. To her, Jonathan was an obstacle, not a person. Colin called on Thursday, asking if Jonathan needed help preparing anything for the dinner. His voice was casual and friendly, with no trace of guilt. Jonathan replied that everything was under control, thanked him, and hung up. That night, he watched the recordings again, not out of masochism, but to be absolutely certain he was doing the right thing. Every frame confirmed his decision. Each of their laughs, each touch, each mention of him being predictable, solidified his resolve. Saturday arrived. Jonathan woke early, bought flowers for his mother and a bottle of wine for his father, and arrived at his parents' house with Laura by his side. She wore a light blue dress and was smiling, commenting on how nice it was to gather the family. Jonathan drove in silence. Colin showed up 15 minutes later, greeting everyone warmly, hugging Laura just a second longer than appropriate, and Jonathan observed every detail. Dinner went smoothly. Jonathan's mother had made lasagna, the family favorite, and everyone chatted about small talk, work, the weather, vacation plans. Jonathan joined the conversation, but his mind was elsewhere, mentally rehearsing what was about to happen. After dessert, when everyone was relaxed in the living room, Jonathan stood up and asked for their attention. He said he had something important to show, something that involved everyone present. His mother smiled, thinking it might be an announcement about a pregnancy or a job promotion. His father adjusted his glasses, curious. Laura looked at him with slight discomfort but still no real concern. Colin sat on the couch, sipping beer, completely at ease. Jonathan plugged the USB drive into the TV and pressed play. The room fell into absolute silence as the video played. The footage was crystal clear, Laura and Colin in the car, their kisses, their intimate conversations, Colin adjusting his seat, their references to Jonathan as a problem to be resolved. Jonathan added no dramatic music or effects. He didn't need to. Raw reality was devastating enough. He watched their reactions. His mother covered her mouth, her eyes instantly filling with tears. His father turned pale, his jaw clenched. Laura jumped to her feet, trying to turn off the TV, but Jonathan blocked the remote. Colin froze, beer still in hand, all color draining from his face. When the video ended, Jonathan finally spoke, his voice calm, almost serene, which made it all the more powerful. 3 months. For at least 3 months, you two have been doing this. 3 months of lies, of looking me in the eyes and pretending everything was fine. 3 months of you laughing behind my back, calling me predictable, discussing when would be the right time to discard me. Laura tried to speak, but Jonathan raised his hand, silencing her. No. You won't talk now. I had to watch hours of you two talking. Now it's my turn. Jonathan walked to the center of the room, controlling every movement, every word. You know what's funny? I actually thought I was going crazy. That my suspicions were just paranoia, that I was being jealous for no reason. I even thought about therapy because I felt insecure in my own marriage. And you two let me. You let me believe the problem was me. He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter disbelief. Those work meetings, Laura. Remember how many times I offered to pick you up? How many times I genuinely asked how it went, interested in your career? And you lied. Every single time. He turned to Colin, and for the first time his voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from contained rage. You. My brother. How many times did I help you? How many times did I lend you money you never paid back? I got you jobs, took you in when you needed it. And you repaid me by sleeping with my wife and planning to get rid of me like I was trash. Colin tried to stand, mumbling something about explaining, but Jonathan pressed on, his voice sharpening. You know what hurts me most, Colin? It's not even the betrayal itself. It's the ease of it. The ease with which you got into her car, adjusted the seat like it was your territory, like I didn't even exist. You felt so comfortable destroying my life that you didn't even bother to hide it properly. Jonathan's father growled a "sit down" so heavy with disappointment that Colin immediately obeyed, shrinking into the couch like a child caught doing something terrible. Colin tried to speak, his voice shaking. Jonathan, it was a mistake, we didn't mean to. Jonathan cut him off with a dry laugh. Didn't mean to. Didn't mean to. Colin, I watched you two planning. You chose to deceive. And today, the truth is only coming out because I refuse to keep living in that illusion. Jonathan turned his attention back to Laura, who was now silently crying, but he felt no pity. And you? The woman who swore to love and honor me, in sickness and in health. You turned our marriage into a joke. And you know what's more pathetic? You didn't even have the courage to be honest. You preferred to keep me as the husband who believed everything while you lived a double life with my brother. Jonathan picked up his phone and continued. I have the messages you two exchanged. Want me to read some out loud for everyone to hear, Laura? Would you like your mother-in-law to hear you say sleeping with me was just fulfilling conjugal duty? Or would you prefer I read the part where you and Colin debated waiting for a better time to break up, as if I were just an inconvenient detail in your lives? Laura tried to approach him, murmuring a weak "I'm sorry," but Jonathan stepped back, his whole body rejecting any closeness to her. Don't come near me. Not ever again. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. Jonathan's mother was now openly sobbing, looking between her two sons as if she couldn't process that one had done this to the other. His father, always a man of few words, finally spoke, his voice heavy with deep sorrow. Colin, get out of my house. Now. Colin tried to argue, but his father repeated it louder this time, get out of my house. Colin stood, looked at Jonathan with a mix of shame and desperation, and walked out the front door without another word. Laura stood frozen, still crying, but Jonathan no longer saw her as the woman he'd married. He saw a stranger who'd destroyed his life. Jonathan took the USB drive, looked at his parents, and said he was leaving. He needed space to process everything. His mother tried to hug him, but he gently pulled away, saying he wasn't ready for comfort yet, that he needed time alone. Laura followed him to the door, begging to talk, but he simply told her she'd receive divorce papers soon and should get a lawyer. He drove back to the house, that place that would never again feel like home, picked up a suitcase he'd already secretly packed, and checked into a nearby hotel. On Monday, Jonathan handed all the evidence to his attorney, who assured him the process would be swift and favorable. The recordings were irrefutable proof of adultery, and in a state that still considered fault in divorce cases, Laura would have little room to negotiate. His attorney, an experienced man named Richard, reviewed every video and message and shook his head with a mix of professionalism and genuine indignation. In 20 years of practice, I've seen a lot, but betrayal with the spouse's own brother? And with this level of premeditation? This makes our job a lot easier, Jonathan. She has no defense. Jonathan blocked Laura's number, blocked Colin's, and instructed his lawyer to handle all communication. Laura tried sending emails, but they were automatically redirected to Richard. She showed up at Jonathan's workplace, but corporate security stopped her from entering the building after Jonathan formally requested it. Over the following days, news spread through the family and social circle like wildfire. Jonathan's older sister, Catherine, who'd always been close to Laura, called him heartbroken, apologizing for not noticing anything. Jonathan reassured her, no one could have predicted this. Laura and Colin were masters of deception. Colin was effectively banished from all family events. Jonathan's mother, shattered by her younger son's betrayal, spent weeks in visible grief. She called Jonathan almost daily, crying, wondering where she'd gone wrong raising Colin, if there were signs she'd missed. Despite his own pain, Jonathan tried to comfort her, saying Colin made adult choices and she wasn't to blame. His father cut off whatever occasional financial help he'd still given Colin, and in a tense phone call, told his younger son he'd died to the family that night at dinner. Colin tried to justify himself, claiming he'd fallen in love and couldn't help it, but his father hung up on him. Laura faced her own consequences. Co-workers who found out began treating her coldly. Mutual friends sided with Jonathan once they heard the full story. She tried sending messages through acquaintances, asking for a chance to explain or apologize properly, but Jonathan remained unmoved. No explanation could justify 3 months of calculated betrayal. No apology could erase the things she'd said about him in those recordings. The divorce was finalized quickly. Jonathan kept the house, since he'd bought it before the marriage and it was in his name. Laura didn't contest anything, probably out of shame or because she knew she couldn't defend herself. The division of assets was relatively straightforward, and within weeks, Jonathan was legally free. Colin tried to approach him once, showing up at his workplace, but security escorted him out when Jonathan made it clear he wanted no contact. The family was never the same. Holiday gatherings became tense. Jonathan's mother eventually agreed to speak to Colin again, but their relationship was irreparably damaged. Jonathan chose to distance himself as well, needing space from the pain that family now represented. 9 months passed. Jonathan was at a coffee shop near work when he saw Laura for the first time since the divorce. She sat alone at a table in the back, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. She looked smaller somehow, as if guilt had shrunk her. She saw him, and for a moment their eyes met. Jonathan saw something in her gaze, regret, maybe, or just a late understanding of what she'd lost. He picked up his coffee, gave a brief, neutral nod, and walked out without a word. There was no anger anymore. No sharp pain. Just indifference, and that was the greatest victory of all. Jonathan eventually started dating again, cautiously, but wiser from the bitter lessons he'd learned about recognizing warning signs. He moved into a modern downtown apartment, adopted a dog, and began hiking on weekends. The camera he'd installed in that car had saved him from years of additional lies. The recordings that exposed the betrayal also revealed who he truly was, someone who deserved honesty, loyalty, and respect. Colin and Laura could have chosen each other honestly from the start, but they chose betrayal, deception, and casual cruelty instead. On an autumn afternoon, while walking his dog through a park, Jonathan's phone rang. It was his mother, asking if he'd come to Thanksgiving. Jonathan paused. The family was broken, but not destroyed. He agreed to go, but made it clear that if Colin showed up, he'd leave. His mother assured him that wouldn't happen. She'd finally learned that loyalty has consequences, and some acts are unforgivable not because the wronged person is resentful, but because the breach of trust was so complete that there's no fixing it. Jonathan hung up, looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, and smiled faintly. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the fairy tale ending he'd imagined when he married Laura on that sunny day years ago. But it was his life, honest and free of lies. And that, he realized, was worth more than any illusion of happiness built on deception. The camera revealed the truth, and the truth, no matter how painful, had set him free. Jonathan kept walking, his dog running ahead, and for the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. Not because he'd gotten revenge, but because he'd refused to be complicit in his own humiliation. He chose dignity, and that choice made all the difference. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.